United States History 9B, Unit 5, The Causes of World War I. As World War I was starting in Europe, the United States was busy at home. The Mexican government was overthrown in 1911. Since Mexico is our southern neighbor, this was of great concern to the American government. President Woodrow Wilson, in 1914, sent United States Marines to overthrow an unpopular government which had taken the place of the original government in Mexico. It was a massive failure, and the United States was greatly embarrassed that it intervened in other countries. Imperialist powers seemed to be taking over foreign policy. This brewed significant trouble between the United States and Mexico. Rebels under the leadership of Francisco Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata opposed the provisional government and so they were working with the United States but ended up working against him. Pancho Villa ended up murdering 18 United States citizens in New Mexico. This would be one of the events that would spark a near war between the United States and Mexico. President Woodrow Wilson would send troops to the border and only withdraw those troops as the United States was looking to enter World War I in 1917. Tensions would remain between the United States government and the Mexican government throughout the early 1920s. Although many Americans wanted to stay out of the war, several factors made American neutrality difficult to maintain. As an industrial and imperial power, the United States felt many of the same pressures that had led the nations of Europe into devastating warfare. Historians generally cite four long-term causes of the First World War: nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and the formation of a system of alliances. We'll talk about each in depth. American neutrality, which was hinged upon the fact that Americans really focused on their own sphere of influence. The U.S. was involved in Western Hemisphere issues only, so those affecting North America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean islands. That's a combination of a variety of foreign policies over the years that would create that idea that Americans should be involved in their sphere of influence and Europeans should be involved in their sphere of influence, which is more the Eastern Hemisphere. Americans, however, do share a common ancestry with Great Britain, and we had very strong ties to what would later become the Allied powers. But back to the four causes of World War I. The first one is nationalism. So this cartoon harkens back to the British. Who's absent? Is it you? This is a political cartoon calling for all British men and all former British colonial men, mainly Americans, to serve their national pride. So nationalism is the devotion to the interests and culture of one nation. Throughout the 19th century, politics in the Western world were deeply influenced by this concept of nationalism. Often, nationalism led to competitive and antagonistic rivalries among nations. In this atmosphere of competition, many feared Germany's growing power in Europe. In addition, there were various ethnic groups that resented domination by others and longed for their nations to become independent. Many ethnic groups looked to larger nations for protection. Russia regarded itself as the protector of Europe's Slavic people, no matter which government they live under. Under these Slavic peoples were the Serbs. Serbia, located in the Balkans, was an independent nation, but millions of ethnic Serbs lived under the rule of Austria-Hungary. As a result, Russia and Austria-Hungary were rivals for influence over Serbia. So this idea of nationalism is one of the main causes of World War I. Furthermore was the concept of imperialism. So here we see England represented as a many-legged octopus grabbing all the areas that it can. England controlled vast swaths of Egypt. It also controlled India, Canada, Jamaica, Ireland, Malta, and a variety of other areas of the world, showing that the British Empire is large and expansive. For many centuries, European nations had been building empires, slowly extending their economic and political control over various peoples of the world. So this idea of empire building was extremely competitive. The colonies supplied the European imperial powers with raw materials and provided markets for manufactured goods. As Germany industrialized, they were such a big country, it competed with France and Britain in the contest for colonies. This would become problematic as England, France, and Germany would be such powerful governments and powerful economies that they would begin to compete with one another both abroad and at home. So this is one of the second causes, a long-term cause of World War I. The third long-term cause of World War I is this idea of militarism. Empires were really expensive to build and to defend. The growth of nationalism and imperialism led to increased military spending. Because each nation wanted stronger armed forces than those of any potential enemy, the imperial powers followed a policy of militarism. That's the development of armed forces and their use as a tool of diplomacy. So this was really fueled by the need to protect these vast empires. By 1890, the strongest nation on the European continent was Germany, which had set up an army reserve system that drafted and trained young men. Since they needed a stronger army than that of their neighbors, just in case, this would cause a domino effect of all militaries in Europe. Britain was not initially alarmed by Germany's military expansion, because as an island nation, Britain had always relied on its navy for defense and protection of its shipping routes, and the British Navy was the strongest in the world. However, in 1897, Wilhelm II, that's Germany's Kaiser or Emperor, decided that his nation should also become a major sea power in order to compete more successfully against the British. Soon, British and German shipyards competed to build the largest battleships and destroyers. France, Italy, Japan, and the United States would quickly join the arms naval race. The final long-term cause of World War I was the alliance system. So the alliance system is a complicated web of friendships and mutual protection agreements. So this cartoon was produced by the Chicago Tribune in the mid-1900s, called The Crime of the Ages. Who did it? So we can see all major European powers essentially pointing fingers at one another about who actually started World War I and sacrificed the peace of Europe. So the alliance system, remember an alliance is a formal agreement or union between nations. If we think about it, by 1907 there were two major defense alliances in Europe. The Triple Entente, later known as the Allies, consisted of France, Britain, and Russia. The Triple Alliance consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Germany and Austria-Hungary, together with the Ottoman Empire, a smaller player in the Central Powers, that's mostly the Middle Eastern lands controlled by the Turks, later became the Central Powers. The alliances provided a measure of international security because nations were reluctant to disturb the balance of power. As it turned out, a spark would set off a major conflict. So the four main causes of war essentially were like gas cans waiting to be ignited at any given moment. And the spark, or the powder keg, sometimes it's referred to, that would ignite war happened in the Balkan Peninsula. This was known as the powder keg of Europe. In addition to the ethnic rivalries among the Balkan peoples, so the people that lived in this area of the Balkan Peninsula, which is down in this area, this region right here, Europe's leading powers had specific interests there. Russia wanted access into the Mediterranean Sea, and Germany wanted a rail link to the Ottoman Empire, down in this region here. Austria-Hungary, which had taken control of Bosnia in 1878, accused Serbia of subverting its rule over Bosnia. The powder keg was ready to explode. In June 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian throne, visited the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo. As the royal entourage of the Archduke drove through the city, a Serbian nationalist stepped from the crowd and shot the Archduke and his wife Sophie. The shooter was a member of the Black Hand, an organization promoting the Serbian nationalism. The assassinations touched off a diplomatic crisis. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary, where Archduke Franz Ferdinand was from, declared what was expected to be a short war against Serbia. However, the alliance system pulled one nation in after another into the conflict. 3 days later, on August 1st, 1914, Germany, obligated by treaty to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on Russia's ally France. After Germany invaded Belgium, Britain declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Great War had begun, and soon that complicated web of alliance systems would create World War I. Again, in the powder keg that was the Balkan Peninsula, we saw the spark which would lead us to war. It happened in June 1914 in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Again, the heir to the Austrian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary, which supported Archduke Franz Ferdinand, would declare war on Serbia. Germany, obligated by treaties to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia, which was supported by Serbia. Therefore, this would drag everyone into a complicated system that would lead us to World War I. In the early years of the war, we would see the Allies, France, Britain, and Russia, fighting the Triple Alliance, or the Central Powers: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. There were several other countries involved in this war, however, we just talk about the main powers. Germany goes on offensive with this thing called the Schlieffen Plan. This plan called for a holding action against Russia combined with a quick drive through Belgium to Paris, so Germany was fighting a war on two fronts, both its western and eastern front. Those two fronts would cause problems for Germany and the Central Powers, as they were expensive to maintain in both lives and money. On the western front, we see the beginning of what we call trench warfare. This diagram specifically shows trench warfare. And in looking at this diagram, you see the front trench line, the supportive trench, the reserve trench, and the enemy trench. So literally, both sides were fighting what was sometimes as small as 20 yards or 25 yards to a mile of land at a time. So this war was extremely costly, both to the land physically, but also in form of... Trench warfare continues on for another 3 years. Americans are forced to question their neutrality, and eventually, 3 years into war, Americans would be dragged into World War I, thus sparking a true world war as it touched both hemispheres.